Lesley, can I call you Lesley? I mean,
Of course you can.
I, I'm really excited. You're a bit of a legend here, right? And so, and I feel like maybe I should call you Professor Yellowlees, but if you allow
Oh,
me to
please
call you,
don't.
yeah. So Lesley, it's amazing. Yeah, it was really exciting and looking forward to this one. When we reached out and we asked you whether you were willing to be on our podcast, and you said yes, I say, I can't believe it. Yeah, I'm going to speak to her. so I will start with a thank you. So we really appreciate you, taking this time with us. It's a privilege. Welcome.
It's lovely to be here. So thank you very much.
The usual way we do this is kind of exploring the person around the science. I like. I think there is one thing I often say is that it's very unfortunate that in science very often the people who run it end up being like names on a paper, right? There's a list of authors with names and strange symbols in there. But when I, running this podcast, I've had the privilege to speak to a lot of scientists, and as you start knowing them better, the personalities come across, and you can see that in their science, right? And you need no introduction. So in a way, you're a celebrity in the field, and maybe this makes a bit less sense with you. But I'd love to do it this way and kind of understand your path and how you got into your work and how the scientific production came up and your interest and all the rest. So I mean, it makes sense to start from the beginning, and it might be a bit of a naive question, right? But I like to make it a bit fun. You're a Scottish, right? You're in Edinburgh. You've been there for most of your life, but
I have.
you were born in London, though. That's a bit controversial, isn't it? So, are you English or are you Scottish?
Well, I count myself as Scottish. Well, I count myself as British, actually. But if I had to choose, I would be Scottish. Definitely, I would be Scottish. So I was born in London because my grandfather died. He had cancer and he died, and my mother went down to be with her mother, and I was born 4 weeks early because of all this trauma. So I was just in the wrong place. I mean, I think it was an almighty rush for my father to get down there to be there. So I was not meant to be born in London.
Okay.
But, who knows? That's where I ended up.
That's simply life unpredictability there,
That's very true.
Okay. So it's not a mark on your sort of Scottish resume. It's important,
well,
right?
No. Well, I mean, I was actually born within the sound of Bow Bells, so technically I'm not even a Londoner. I'm a Cockney. But do I sound like a Cockney? No, I do not. No, I probably sound Scottish.
It's just good. So thanks for that. I kind of relieved in a way, this is what I would expect you to feel. But is the follow-up would be, is what took you to a scientific career? And this might be a bit of a naive question because many people say, hey, I play with a lot of chemistry set when I was a kid, but it's very often a surprise answer as well.
So I had the chemistry set, of course I did, and grew the copper sulfate crystals, of course I did. But why did I do science? Because at school, I liked science. I was good at science, and I think you always like something that you're good at. And do you know what? The real reason, or one of the real reasons, was that I could see I could get 100% in science. I could see I could get in an exam, I could get 100%. I'm not saying I ever got 100%, but I could see that it was achievable. Was it achievable to ever get 100% in writing an English essay? No, it was not. So not for me anyway. So I'll put my hand up. I'm a card-carrying competitive person. So if I could go for something that I could get the 100 in, I would be going for that. So that was one of the attractions to me for science. At least at school, there was a right answer.
Makes sense. You follow your talents, right? I mean, that's what all people should do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you have any family traditions, in with academic careers? Have you got support there, or were you, among the first in your families to do advanced studies.
No, my mother didn't go to university, but my father did, and he did a physics degree, and he also did a maths degree.
I see.
So he was quite scientific. But I have two sisters. Neither of them did science. No, so
So you
it
you,
was
you
me.
are the scientist in the family, basically.
I got my father's genes in the science.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, um, have you had any sort of important figure as you were growing up who kind of inspired you? And it's, how did it go? Of course, you go to uni, you're quite good at that. But I'm sure there's been lots of choices and a lot of like sort of moments. Is there anything notable worth sharing, or any person? Right?
So I went to an all girls school.
Mm.
And I had three inspirational teachers in physics, chemistry, and maths who all believed in me, and who gave me huge amounts of encouragement. And I think any child at school needs encouragement. And so when I said I wanted to go to university to do science, then all I got was encouragement to do that. So I went to university, and I did chemical physics as a first degree because I couldn't decide whether to do chemistry, physics, or maths. And chemical physics allowed me
You're
to
in,
do all
they're in the middle,
three.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
makes sense.
Now, I'm not a person that sits on the fence. Normally, I go and decide, but I absolutely couldn't choose. And I think to a certain extent, when I look at science careers now, I think a lot of the exciting science occurs at the boundary
Oh
between different
yes,
sciences.
absolutely.
So, in some ways, I'm not saying I was ahead of my time. I wasn't at all. But I liked the different ways of thinking, the different training. A chemist doesn't always think the same way as a physicist or a mathematician. And so I think the training that I had in all three disciplines I found was enormously beneficial to me. So that's really why that's the reason I did what I did.
It makes perfect sense. I would also add that very often scientists coming from different disciplines don't really speak the same language and sometimes
Oh,
struggle to understand each other.
definitely. Definitely. I mean, and I think how true is that? And how as scientists have we got ourselves into this mess? Where
It's a great point.
so I don't know how we've done it. And I think when you go into a different branch, and I even found that in different branches of chemistry, when you start off doing something, and I was always reinventing myself, always trying to develop, learn something new. And at the beginning, it's all learning the language itself, and
Oh
then
yeah.
translating it in your own mind as to the terminology that you were familiar with and you were comfortable with.
Takes skills, right? Because very often scientists are not selected. At least maybe it's different now, but even in my generation, I wouldn't say that talents in communication, or interpersonal skills are necessarily the first thing, right? Or were the first things. But you really need that if you want to sort of
Oh,
overcome and, as you say, understand the language and get a message through.
I think that's very true. And I was having a discussion, in fact, with somebody yesterday about how we as scientists don't always bother to take other people with us.
Right.
We talk in shorthand to each other and understand what each other is saying. But then when it comes to speaking to other people, I think it's a great skill, and I think it's a skill that people have to learn, is this communication with others that are not so deeply embedded in the language or the methodology of thought or whatever it is that you're doing. And I think we do ourselves a great disservice by not making sure that other people understand what it is we're doing or trying to do.
Indeed, do you think this is on the basis of a certain sort of distrust in science and the scientific community from the general public that we see recurrently, right, in the mainstream media?
And is it arrogance on our part? you know, I don't think any specific section should take any credit or any blame, but I do think we owe it to everybody. And you know, we're recovering from a pandemic, COVID, where science had a very much higher profile,
Yeah.
and people, you know, in the UK and in this, and believed in what the science was saying. Government said that we're being led by the science. Now, how true that is, I think we'll find out later in history, you know, and I think that'll be an interesting thing to do.
Totally.
But that is what they said, and so people did trust the science, um, which I was very grateful for. I liked the fact that it was being scientifically led. I mean, I think that there had to be evidence, and then people looked at the evidence and made decisions. How wonderful is that? And that is what it should be. The downside, I think, if I reflect on it, is that sometimes the science was oversimplified,
Right.
and so I think we then got into the danger of erring too much into the oversimplification. I mean, you know, if you do research is hard. Research is tremendously rewarding, especially when it goes well. But it's hard. It's difficult. And when I go and try and explain to people what research is about, unless you've actually done some research, it's quite difficult to grasp that you come up with this hypothesis. You fix some experiments you want to do. You go and do the experiments, and they don't necessarily work. You know, research is just about as much about failure as is about success.
It's probably even more so, right?
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree with you.
And you're right. And you think this is the argument, right? So the scientists have been in this sort of Babel tower for a long time because science is complicated and there is the risk of oversimplifying it, is basically sending the wrong messages across.
Yeah, I do. And I think we do ourselves a great disservice, and I also think we do the public a great disservice. And the public, I just mean everybody that is not doing research, you know, whether they be politicians, whether they be my neighbour next door or my sister in a different city. But it's those who have not conducted. And so I think we just have to learn how to be able to explain it better. You know, I don't think we should oversimplify all the time. We just have to be able to explain it.
I agree. It's really hard, but I really feel for that because I have the problem of trying to explain. Well, this has been a problem for many years now. Trying to explain my mom what I'm doing for a living,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And it's really hard. And I don't think she still understands it. She say, "Yeah, you do something difficult." It's not very. I'm just on a podcast at the moment, but it's you know, kind of finding the right ways is difficult but important at the same time, and there's a lot of work to do, I believe.
Yeah. So, you know, I gave my mother a copy of my PhD thesis when I completed it in the hard copy. And as she says, the only bit she understood was the bit that said "to my family" at the beginning.
Yeah. I think my mom has a copy of my PhD thesis. I don't think she's ever opened it. So there is actually a to my family, but I don't think she knows. Yeah. Anyways, have you seen any progress? I mean, I believe from what I've seen and, you know, the experience with the podcast, that the newer generations seem to understand that. And there are some, I mean, there seems to be a bit more attention to communication, a bit more talent there. Would you agree with that, or are we still behind?
So the optimist in me, and I'm definitely a half glass full person, would like to believe that. But I'm a member of CASE, which is the Campaign for Science and Engineering in the UK, and I sit on their board. And we've just conducted a big survey, a big piece of work on how the public perceive and understand research and development. And I think it's quite frightening, the the level where people understand it, and just how few people do truly understand what research and R&D is.
Yeah.
And when we looked at it as a breakdown of age, that the younger people in particular thought that the public purse should not be paying for research. And that frightens me. That is a great concern. So I would like to believe that the public are getting better, but are they? I don't know. I don't think the numbers, I don't think the statistics, I don't think when you go out and ask people that is necessarily true. But, we've got to get people understanding, the fundamental understanding what the benefits of research are. They're obvious to you and me, and I think they'll probably be obvious to most people that listen to this podcast. But we've got to somehow stretch beyond the people we're comfortable speaking to, because if we don't, then I fear for the funding of research.
It would be an easy thing to cut once times get tough, right? Because public don't understand it.
And also, we know that much of the research we're involved in at the moment, if we're not involved in translating it or designing the widget, and there's a lot of good science in that. Fundamental science, there can be quite a long time lag, can't there, between doing the fundamental science and it actually delivering something that my mother would understand what it was delivering.
Yeah. And the applied science doesn't exist without the fundamental science decades before.
Correct. And that's a message we've got to get across, because it's too easy to otherwise cut the fundamental research.
And you get the industrial war funding the applied.
Yeah. And fine, that'll succeed, won't it, for 5-10 years maybe. But then we're going to be in a right mess because we're going to have no fundamental research to fall back on.
Yeah, and progress will stop. Do you think the scientific community, I'm sure your observation point is privileged compared to mine. Do you see the scientific community coming to terms with that and sort of understanding that something needs to be done?
I think the scientific community constantly needs reminded that needs to be done.
It's interesting. Do we need more advocates like you?
We just I like being an advocate. I like being a champion. I like doing that. I've done it much of my life, but I think it would. I've listened to some of your podcasts that you've done in these series, and it's not a topic that you often discuss.
No.
Would that be fair?
It is.
So, I think it would be interesting to discuss with some of your future scientists, guests, whether they think they should be playing a role in that, or whether they want to leave it to everybody else or somebody else.
This is the best feedback I've got so far, so I'll ensure I'll do, actually.
I just think it would be interesting. And it'd be interesting for me to hear.
I agree, and it would be interesting for me as well. And everybody in the broader scientific community, either from the private sector like myself, in the academic community or whatever, would benefit from it. So and awareness is what we need, right? And then we need some advocates.
Yeah. I agree. But maybe and fine if people want to, write to me and challenge me and say, I don't see that this is a problem, but it's what I perceive.
Well, I don't believe anybody would just deny that this is potentially a problem, right? Because I'm guessing unless you're in the industrial segment, and you probably spend a big chunk of your time just looking for funding, right? And everybody knows how painful and difficult that is, and it's probably becoming even more difficult. And everybody, I'm sure, would rather spend time, thinking about the science rather than thinking about where the money is.
Indeed. I mean, because the science is, that's the exciting bit. I mean, if we go back to the start of this conversation, I did science because it excited. I liked doing it. You like doing the experiments, and of course you do. That's the bit that's why scientists end up being scientists.
Of course.
They don't end up being scientists to go and write grant proposals. In my, my experience, that's not
silly.
what people do.
There are some who are good, but somebody is
Yeah.
good at writing grants, and and they get funding a lot. So it takes skills, right? But
Yes, that can be learned.
yes, I wonder whether these are the same skills that you need to have to be a good scientist. You end up having like bad scientists very good at getting funded, and maybe potentially great scientists who are pretty poor or are not interested in learning the skills that end up not having an impact because of that. And that's also a bit unfair, but it is what it is, right? And people need to go through it.
Yes.
We've spoken about the importance of fundamental research. That's what you have done for most of your career, right? Your involvement in electrochemistry and spectroelectrochemistry, there's a lot of pioneering work in there. And it's interesting, right? Because we said, hey, you need the fundamental research to that, maybe 10, 20 years down the line, there'll be some applied technology from it. And electrochemistry is an interesting example to me. And maybe I'm off, and please correct me if you disagree. But there's a bit of a renaissance, if you want, right? There's it's not new, right? Electrochemistry has been done since the 70s, the 80s, probably even earlier,
Yeah.
right? It's electronic effects,
1800s.
Right? Yes. But if I look at how hot it is at the moment with applications in the sort of hydrogen economy, or the solar panels, and people are thinking about carbon capture, nitrogen cycle, and all these sort of things, electrochemistry plays a big role. There's the startups, there's new technologies out there, and this is possible because of all the fundamental research that's been done over the decades or even centuries, right? So it's a beautiful example to me. And I like to go through it, and your experience, and what you reckon your contribution to the field has been. And is it true that you started in Australia working on electrochemistry, or have I got confused?
Yeah, no, you've got that right. Okay. You've got that right. So yes, I when I graduated with my degree in chemical physics, my husband and I decided we were going to go and travel. So we ended up in Australia, and I got a job there researching solar energy, and that's where I got into electrochemistry and solar energy. That's what started my enthusiasm for the subject.
So this just happened. You happened to be there, and that was the opportunity you had. That's you started. Or did you have like an interest in you? Kind of created the opportunity for yourself.
No, so I was there, and my husband got a job, and so I wanted to get a job. I mean, I know the weather was great.
Yeah, of course.
But you need money to live on, and also I like science, and I got the opportunity of doing research in the University of Queensland, doing solar energy research.
How long have you been there?
I was there for 2.5 years. And we loved it, but we decided to come back to the UK. We came back to the UK, back to Edinburgh, in fact, and I had realised that when I was doing the research in Australia, that actually if I was going to make a success of doing research, then I really needed a PhD. I hadn't got a PhD by this stage, so I sort of did things around completely the wrong way, but I don't think there's a right way. I think there's just a way you do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we came back to the UK, back to Edinburgh, and I'd enjoyed doing solar energy research. I'd enjoyed electrochemistry. So I went back to the University of Edinburgh, to the chemistry department, and said, I'd like to do a PhD. This is what I'd like to do. This is what I'd like, what I want to do. And they said, well, and I knew perfectly well they didn't do that type of research. But they said, we've got somebody who does inorganic electrochemistry. So let's speak to, and I spoke to him, and he said, well, I've got funding. come and we'll design a project together, and we'll design a project using my skills in electrochemistry, and I'll teach you some more, and you can do the solar energy, the dyes that you're interested in. So that's how it happened. So I was very fortunate. I came with a set of ideas, and they weren't laughed out of court, and that's what I ended up doing. So how lucky was I?
Well, you've been. You need some luck, right? But you need to be good at making the best out of it.
Yes, I think that's true. And I was, when I left Scotland, I left. I'd got a good first degree. That when I came back, they said, they were quite willing to take me back again. So it was, which is always one of my maxims to this day, is, don't burn any bridges. You never know when you might need them again. Don't shut any doors. They might, might need them. So
that is so true. Weather-wise, you didn't really gain much coming back to Scotland from
I
Brisbane.
lost. I completely lost. But I did gain, because I came back to my family, and my family is very important to me. So that was the big plus.
My boss worked in Southern California for several years, and then she said at some point she came back to the UK. She at some point she was missing the rain. I'm not sure I can believe that, but because I grew up in Italy and I've been living in England for many years, but yeah, so I'm not sure.
No, never. No, don't miss the rain. The rain. Oh.
So we have spoken about making the science accessible, and having you in. I mean, I would be stupid to miss the opportunity. Why don't you give me your definition of what electrochemistry really means, and spectral electrochemistry really means, and so we can make it accessible for people who are not particularly scientific from the background. And we have several listeners who are interested in science but are not scientists themselves. And I think it would benefit even some chemists, right? Because I myself am more of an organic chemist than I'm stretching now, trying to force you to get into inorganic electrochemistry, but I like challenging myself.
Okay, so electrochemistry, electros, the word electricity, it's the flow of electrons, and what you do in an electrochemical experiment is you push these electrons through some sort of medium, whether it's a solution, whether it's a solid, not so good through a gas, but I tended to push these electrons through a solution that was full, that had contained in that solution a material, a compound that would interact, that would take on board the electron or give up an electron, and then then you would change. So you would change the number of electrons in the system, and then either you would make some chemistry happen, or you would usually you got some chemistry happening, but sometimes just the electrons flowed on and off. And so it's the interaction really between electrons and another species. And electrochemistry, this transfer of electrons happens, it's ubiquitous, it's everywhere. That's what keeps us alive, as well as this flow of electrons.
Yeah, that's very true.
But what I was interested in was in solar energy. And so what electrons do there is that they are light. You can do light as well, can shine on the species, excite electrons, and those electrons can also flow. And what I did was to combine electrochemistry, so that is transferring electrons either on and off a species, with another spectroscopic technique. And why I did that with another, and that's why the spectro comes from the spectral electrochemistry. It's a combination of a spectroscopic technique with an electrochemical technique. And why did I do that? Well, it was to study the characteristics, to try and characterize the new compound you'd formed by either putting an electron onto that or taking an electron off it. So that was to reduce it if you gave it an electron, or oxidize it, take an electron off it. And what did that species look like? What I was interested in was the species that were stable once you changed the number of electrons on board, to characterize them. But equally well, you can also be interested in is if you oxidize or reduce a species, what does it go on and do? A lot of catalysts work through transfer, being oxidized or reduced, changing the number of electrons on board. But what I wanted to do was to study the species you formed by simply changing the number of electrons in the system. And when you changed the number of electrons in that system, where did the electrons go? Were they smeared all over the compound, or did they reside on specific parts of the molecule? That's what I was interested in.
And I guess that's pretty tricky to do if you don't have the right analytical techniques and tools, right? And I guess
correct.
Yeah. There must have been a lot.
So I had to. So I was going to say. So what I had to do was I had to develop those techniques. That I had to develop bits of kit to be able to put the electrochemical part, the electrochemical cell, if you want, the electrodes that were moving moving the electrons inside inside a spectrometer. The two that I really worked on were UV visible light and EPR, electron paramagnetic resonance spectroscopy. Those were the two types of spectroscopy I looked at most thoroughly.
They're rather, right? So people use Raman, people use other spectroscopy techniques.
Yeah. You can do any form of spectroscopy you want. It's whether you can adapt your electrochemical cell to fit inside the spectrometer of choice that you want to measure, whatever you want it is you want to measure.
So when you started with this was what, the 90s, maybe the late 80s?
The late 80s, yeah.
Yeah. So I guess there's been a lot of progress in terms of, tools, right? I mean, analytic instruments, and that probably the field has evolved quite a bit. What's your perspective on what it was when you started and what it is now, and how much the fundamental research and the insight that you and your colleagues in the field sort of progressed on contributed to in terms of sort of finding new materials and moving towards a more applied science in modern days.
Yes. So when I started, there weren't very many scientists doing spectroelectrochemistry. As a technique, they didn't do it. And when young scientists come to me and say, what should I do to develop my career? How can I have a research career? And one of the things I say to them is, well, find what you're going to be known for. Find your niche, so that if somebody hears your name, Lesley Yellowlees, they immediately think spectroelectrochemist. That's what I associate her with. And so that's what I did. I developed these techniques. And as well as applying them to solar dyes, etc., that I was interested in,
sure.
I had a lot of people come to me and say, I've got a redox active, I've got a species that you can reduce or oxidize. Could you look at this for me? Could we look at this together? And it gave me a wonderful opportunity. So, I did work with people developing drugs, for example, or doing but more biological systems, because of course a lot of biological systems, the transfer of electrons is very important.
Of course.
Lots of different materials people brought to me and said, could you look at this? Could you study this for me? So it was a wonderful way of getting involved in different areas of science, but also meeting people from all over the world. And not actually, you got to travel all over the world, because, you used to go, people would go and then say, well, can you come to my lab and teach my group how to do this? So instead of, and they were quite right, instead of sending it all to me, they then got to do it themselves. Great.
Take some creativity and even courage, right? To find a gap and try and fill it. When you started, it was really difficult to analyze and study these systems. And the idea of spectral electrochemistry, hey, I can fill a gap there, but it was unexplored territory, and that's what scientists should do in theory. But
Yeah, yeah.
you could fail, right? Or the chances of success tend to be lower than if you go in as to more explored area. Is it fair?
Yes, the chances of failure are always there. That's what doing research is about, and
Yes, true.
that's what we have to accept. Um, that's part of the. I always think when you stop doing an undergraduate degree and you go and do a postgraduate degree. An undergraduate degree, when you do experiments, they tend to have been thought out beforehand that this is going to teach you something, so it will work.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're doing research, that's the bit that's hard, isn't it? Is to learn that mostly your experiments don't work, but let's celebrate when they do,
And yeah,
because
and
what
and
better
keep,
feeling?
of course, and keep going once things aren't right. And you need to believe in what you're doing. At some point, if you keep going, you'll get somewhere. Is there any piece of work or any moment, of the many things you work on, that you have a particularly fond memory of?
Um, I think when I first developed the UV visible cell, and this was during my PhD, uh, and I did the experiments. I was working on it was ruthenium with 3 bipyridine ligands attached to it, so
Yep.
ruthenium tris bipyridine, and it has 3 relatively easy reductions, so you can reduce it in 1 electron steps 3 times. And I reduced it 3 times, and I got the spectra of each of those 3 reduced species. And what I saw was that each spectra was a combination of the fully reduced species and the oxidized species, and the ones in between were just simply a summation of the two. Okay, so you weren't going through 3 different. What was happening was each time you put an electron on the system, it was going into one of the bipyridine rings,
Oh, I
not all
understand.
of them.
I understand.
So it went into 1, 2, 3. And that had never been seen before. And when I did the experiment and looked at the results and saw that the easiest way to explain what had happened was that it was each of the bipyridine rings in turn being reduced and not over the whole molecule. It was so exciting, and I can remember running down the corridor telling everybody, and nobody else was at all interested in what I was doing. It wasn't their research. They hadn't a clue. Who is this nutcase running down the corridor trying to tell? But, I think it's that that light bulb moment. It was just great. It's just worth doing. That's what science is about.
I understand it. It's like nature is opening up in front of you. Say, yeah. Now I'm
Yes,
showing you how,
yes,
how how it really works, right? Uh,
yes,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
And it was wonderful.
It's incredible, right? Because you've had a long and successful career, and yet what you're telling me is basically your first aha moment. And this is still, the first thing you came up with is when I ask you the question is it's amazing. It's really nice. I guess you must have had then and a few more of these moments where some results were exceptional, but you were kind of got used to it at some point.
I don't think you ever get used to it, because I think it's if you get used to it, then where's the challenge? Because
Of course, of course. Yeah.
so I like the challenge, and I like doing that. But I just still remember the first time it happened to me. The first time, and I think if you were to speak to most scientists, do you not think they would remember the first time it happened?
Probably yes. Yeah, you're not the first one saying that.
Yeah,
But yeah, and it's interesting, and maybe that's probably just how humans are wired, right? Everybody probably has a fond memory of their first love or their first kiss, or
yeah,
uh,
yeah, yeah.
and most likely the first love is not the one of your life, but still remember it very fondly, right? And I guess it's the emotional aspects of science that comes
Uh-huh.
across.
Ah,
That's what I
yeah.
really like. It doesn't, people don't write this in the papers, right? It's all pretty dry language usually. That would make it a bit
Yes.
more accessible.
But I can also remember the first time I was asked to present my results at a conference.
Hmm.
Um, these same results that I'd seen, and would I go and present them? And so I was still a PhD student, so I went to this big conference and presented them. And I can still remember the sheer terror of standing up in front of all these scientists, full of people whose names I knew and, I really looked up to. And I had to do this presentation, and I did the presentation. Um, Came down and sat down, and I got the most blinding headache I've ever got in my life. The stress levels of having to do this were just immense. Uh, and that's another thing we have to learn, as to how to present our material, how to write up this material. But it was exciting to present it. It was much more exciting to present it than to write it up. You're quite right. I mean, it was a dry old paper that only those who wanted to understand it would bother reading it and understand it. But I think you can breathe a bit more life into it when you present it.
Totally. If you're a good presenter, particularly, right? Or if you have good communication skills, some can't do that properly. But anyways, that's that. I'm sure you can. Do you ever think that some new scientists or young scientists can feel the same way with you in the audience? You and other people like you. Have you ever thought about this?
Um, I think we have a response. I mean, I enjoy listening to younger scientists present their work. I find that very energizing. I find it very positive. I really like it. Uh, I think we also have a responsibility, the more senior scientists amongst us, to also ask them, be supportive, but to ask questions of them, that help them think through the answer. You know, I personally feel I find it's my role to be supportive of people, to help them. I, what I've reached a lot of goals, of my own goals. Now it's time to help other people reach their goals. So I'm not there to point score. There's no
No,
point in
of
point
course,
scoring.
of course.
So I think, but be there, and because I can remember when I presented at a junior level, I liked the senior scientists asking me questions, because I felt they were then they were there listening to me. So now it's my turn to listen to them, give
Makes me.
back. Does that make sense?
It does. It does, and that's what great people should think, and that's how you progress with the field, right? And support the whole movement. And you're obviously famous for your pioneering science, but you're also very popular. And your name is, as I said at the beginning, you're a legend to me. Uh, you've been the first woman president of the Royal Society of Chemistry, and you've been one of the biggest advocates for women in STEM. And I think we have to speak about this. I guess this is really important, right? And I like to take the opportunity to get your perspective. But uh, first of all, the first woman president of the Royal Society of Chemistry, and that happened just in, was it 2012?
Yeah.
Feels. I mean, when I thought about it can't be true, right? We didn't have a woman there until you made it in 2012, and there's only been another one since then. Am I
No,
right?
there's been a few now.
A
No,
few
there's
now.
been
Okay.
more.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So it's great. But I was the first in their 170 odd year history.
Right. It took nearly 2 centuries, right, of
Mm,
history
mm,
for
mm,
the Royal Society of
mm.
Chemistry to get a woman in charge, and luckily things have changed. It changed from that. But yeah, how did it feel back then?
So when I was approached to say that they were considering putting my name forward to be president, I was just thrilled. I mean, throughout my career, I've always been interested in I've always taken an interest in the Royal Society of Chemistry. So I'd worked a lot with them. I'd um, been on the council. I'd been in the Dalton division, the Inorganic
Yeah.
division. I'd done some work with the publishing arm. I'd done various jobs with it. So I knew the society well, and I absolutely believed in the society. And so it was a great honor. It was a great privilege to then have my name go forward and then be selected, be by my peers. We all like to have recognition of our peers. That's fantastic.
Of course.
So my name, and so I became the president of the Royal Society of Chemistry. And before I became president, the society approached me, the staff approached me and said, what do you want to do with your presidency? What do you want? Because, of course, you give up your time to do it. It's not a paid job.
No, of course.
So you're giving up your time. So they said it's important that you also get to do something you want to do with the presidency. What do you want to do with this presidency? So I said, well, in my opinion, I'd be very foolish if I didn't use this platform to be able to speak about women in senior positions, women in science as a whole. And they said, well, fine, but I think we should broaden it to be, just not women. It's about all the underrepresented groups within science. And I said, yes, of course, absolutely. I have to say, probably we concentrated more on women than many of the other underrepresented, groups, because this was in 2012. And it was the beginning, I think, of the era of where people were talking about it and actually prepared to do something about changing the lack of women in science, and certainly the lack of women at senior positions in chemistry. But I think, chemistry was probably almost a middle ranking science. If you talk about physics, there's not as many girls take physics at school.
Yeah.
Less than a quarter of people who present for physics A levels are female. Whereas in chemistry, it's much more 50-50. And so the problem isn't at school in chemistry level. But if you were to look at the number of professors in chemistry, then the number of female professors is far too low. It's only about 10% in the UK.
So low?
Yeah. So whereas there's 50% are studying chemistry at university level. So why are we getting this fall off? So not every subject's the same, but there is definitely a leaky pipeline.
Yeah.
And why is that? I believe that science is for everybody. I don't think there's such a thing as chemistry is only for boys. What a load of nonsense.
Yeah.
And I think when we're looking at these big grand challenges, we need as diverse a workforce as we possibly can get, because we're going to find the solutions quicker. Why would you chop off, if you go back to women again, why would you chop off 50% of the population from helping you find a solution?
Of course,
by
makes
only
no sense.
saying only men. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense at all. So I thought it was important that I used the platform I had to be able to advocate for women and those minority groupings who weren't taking science up. Why aren't they taking up science? And then if they are taking up science, why are they leaving science? Why aren't they continuing on to leadership positions, senior positions? What have we got wrong? And what can I do to make it better? And the Royal Society of Chemistry was prepared to back me, and so I had that name behind me as well. Fantastic. What's not to like?
I suppose this was in your mind before becoming the president of the RSC, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yes, yes, yes. And at that time, I looked around. I mean, I was the only female that graduated from my year. I was the only female member of academic staff for a while. Um, it's not a comfortable place to be
Of course not.
the person that sticks out. That's not helping them progress well. I mean, you want to be surrounded by people who were supported, and I had a lot of support. Don't get me wrong, I got a lot of support, but it's so much easier if you're not the only one.
Of course, yeah, I totally understand that. What do you think it is that even from younger age, at least certain scientific disciplines don't seem to be in favor of girls, right, at school, and then why do we have this sort of leakage in the pipeline of women who actually get into sort of scientific career but then don't end up in leadership positions? Is it cultural to start with, and I guess there must be a lot of progress and sort of evolution over time, but what did you find out, starting with the platform at the RSC and all the work you've done since then?
So yes, there's culture in there. I think there's also women still are the main carers in a family. It's still in a majority of families. It'll be the the female who is the carer, and I think we found that out again during COVID, that it was mainly the females that were left with the caring responsibilities. It doesn't have to be children; it can be your elderly parents or whatever. So I think society, particularly in the West, is very geared to that, which isn't helpful. And you need support to be able to do that, to be able to have a career. It's a scientific career it's not all plain sailing,
No.
um, but it can be very rewarding. I also think, I mean, getting into senior leadership roles can be quite lonely. Um, it, it's quite it takes a lot of energy to do it well. Are the rewards great? Yes, they are great, but it, senior leadership positions aren't for everybody, and so. But what I was set out to do was to make the opportunity there for everybody. You don't need to take the opportunity, but at least have it there for you. At least have the door open for you. At least have some support, some help to be able to do it. And in many cases, you know, imposter syndrome's alive and well, isn't it? That people don't think do I have it? Of course I have it. But it's helping people realize that there are coping mechanisms for that, and there are support mechanisms. But let's go for it. The opportunities are wonderful. They're vast, huge, terrific. And I was lucky, or I made my luck, or I had good support. But that should be there for everybody.
Yes, it's the opportunity that you're speaking about, right? And by the
The
way,
opportunity.
yeah, I'm not sure I believe you when you're speaking about imposter syndrome. You can't have imposter syndrome now, if you do, then then of course that would be really reassuring for everybody. Is it true? Do
I
you still have?
do. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Really?
Of course
I,
I do. Of course
I'm
I
not.
do.
I'm not sure I believe you, but I accept it. Yeah, I said at the
Yeah,
beginning
no.
you were a legend, so you really are.
Well, that the rest of the family won't be pleased when I go back with my ego puffed up today, and they'll be going, right,
Well,
enough of that.
so I was reading your tapping all our talents report. I think the last one I found was
Yeah,
2018, I think, and
yeah.
it was kind of reassuring because it felt like there was an improvement there, right?
There was,
Yeah,
and
and
it's continuing.
it is continuing. So in a way, your platform helped out, and and things are getting better. So are you positive? And what do you think
Of
the future
Yeah,
is going to look like?
I, you've got to be positive, and being positive for me means that I find it much easier to go out and be supportive and positive with other people. If I seriously thought that that it was going to be so hard to do science and come with the background you come with, and that you can't overcome that, and you can't enjoy it, and you can't deliver, and you can't contribute to it, how depressing would that be? I mean, I always find it's when you speak to early career researchers, you can't spend too long on the negatives of saying, well, give us your examples of, give an example of, you know, how some treatment you got because you were a female and the male wouldn't have happened. Well, of course, we can all come up with stories like that. But if you keep continually telling these stories, why would anybody ever want to go and do that as a job? Why would anybody want to take up a career in science? If so, I try very hard not to tell those stories and to tell the positive ones, to do the reinforcing ones, because, you know, if I was starting off again and all I heard was a litany of, oh, this is going to happen to you, and you're going to have this disaster, and you know, men aren't going to take you seriously, and etc., etc., would you get up in the morning? No, you know.
No,
So I think it's important you tell the positive story, but not only do you tell the positive story, you live the positive story. So you show by example. So it's important that you show by example and that you help people, you give back. You know, let's help people on. Let's not do them down.
of course, makes a lot of sense. What do you think we need to keep doing? Is it just speaking about it enough, or is there any sort of more concrete action that we should consider as a scientific community?
No, I mean, I think, and people are doing it now. So, you know, when I started off and you went for an interview, and that happened a lot, is that colleagues wanted to appoint somebody that was in their own image almost, you know, that they could talk football with. I mean, I can't talk football with anybody. I have no desire to. And I'm not saying all men want to talk about football either. But, you know, I think I think a lot of work has been done to help people realize unconscious bias, if you want, and that has positive and negative connotations associated with it. But I do think it's terribly important that we all understand our own biases, and guard against that, because, you know, keep your option, you know, look for the best set of team members you can, and not you know, to get a good team going, you don't want everybody thinking the same.
No,
you don't want everybody with the same background. You want people thinking differently with different backgrounds, and to be open to that background, and to be open to what they're delivering, what they're bringing to the conversation, what they're bringing to the problem. And I think that aspect has got a lot better, because people have realized that, in fact, teams perform much better if they've got a diversity within them. So, you know, but that took some time to help people understand that. And we've got to help people understand things. You know,
of course.
You can't just I can't go in and say, you will do this, you will do that, you will do. You can't do that. So that will happen.
Do you think the UK is a little bit ahead of the curve compared to other places? I know that the Nordic countries have done a lot, you know,
Yes.
you know, in a sort of broader context, you know,
Yeah.
in the society for equal opportunities. But you know, if you just look at the science field, would you say the UK is in a good position at the moment? Is there more work to be done?
There's always work to be done. I mean, I think the States have done a lot of work as well. And when I started, I looked to the States really for what they do, and inspiration, showed how it could be done. You know, where possible, don't go and reinvent the wheel. Just go and look to see where it's been successful. But there's still work to be done. And people say, oh, we've sorted the gender thing, we don't need to worry about it anymore. But we do need to still worry about it. It's still not fixed, you know. We've still got a way to go. I mean, I'm not saying you have to get to 50-50. I don't think that's true at all. But I do think if we can, great. But I think as long as the opportunity is there, and that people aren't coming up for blocks for what they're in their career just simply from their background, that is rubbish. That is so wrong. So wrong.
We will need to to remain conscious, right, and keep being explicit about it, and not let it become like a habit, or forgetting about the problem, because it could reverse. That's what you're saying.
That is absolutely what I'm saying, and that there's been research, and that is shown to be the case. So until you get it embedded in the culture, until it stops being something that needs to be talked about, then we have to keep remembering. Then we have to keep pushing it forward.
Do you think
Keep
this
pushing
moment
that
is?
agenda.
Do you think this moment is far still? Is it going to happen in a decade too, or will it ever?
Well, statistics say it's still a good
Still
way
not.
off.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Now you're a scientist, of course.
I love the numbers.
Yeah.
Give me the data.
Of course.
But so what I mean, a very obvious thing is the gender pay gap is
Right.
still, unfortunately, alive and well. But that can't, I would like it to be solved overnight. It won't be. So we've got to work at it. But to work at it, you've got to keep reminding yourself that it's still a problem.
Of course, makes sense, and you need to ensure that you have that. You mentioned it before. As a with what you have represented for the community and your professional experience, and the work you've done, you can be an example, right? And if you feel like you're not alone, it gets easier. And for that, I'm thankful, right? And I'm sure that the whole community is. You've done a fantastic job for that, and it's beautiful to see. And I know for sure that there are a lot of people looking at you and just trying to replicate what you've done, or just carry on with the work.
It's nice to hear you say that, because when I became the first female president of the Royal Society of Chemistry, and also when I became the first head of school, and I became the first head of science and engineering at the University of Edinburgh, I never wanted to be the last. I think if you
Of course.
find to break through the glass ceiling, or whatever you're calling it, but as people also, to continue with that, throw down the ladder to make sure that there's people coming up behind you, because I would have counted it as a failure if I'd been the first and then that hadn't, and the last. How awful would that have been? That would have been, well, I would have taken that as failure.
Of course, makes sense.
And that hasn't happened. So thank goodness.
I'm tempted to ask you a question that might be uncomfortable. Are you proud? If you look back, are you proud?
Yes, I think I
was hoping you said
rarely
yes.
yeah, rarely do I look back and think to myself, I must, I should be proud, but I've enjoyed. Look, I'm not this saint. I'm not. I've enjoyed myself hugely. I've had lots of fantastic opportunities, which I have tended to embrace and welcome and grasp and do them all. So I've thoroughly enjoyed my career. I've been blessed with a lot of opportunities, but I've also taken those opportunities.
Of course.
And that's another thing I always think is, say yes when somebody offers, give it a go. Rarely is it you can't come back from if it doesn't work out, but usually it does work out. But when it doesn't, if you've not shut those doors as we talked about earlier, then you can go back. But grasp the opportunity.
Regretting not to have taken an opportunity would be much worse than having gone for it and failed, right? Yeah.
Awful. Awful, don't you think? I mean, I never. That was one of the things I've lived by, is to never feel that I would look back and think, I wish I'd done that.
I agree.
So,
It's been a refrain for me. Not all the opportunity worked out well, but hey, at least I tried.
and you know, I'll bet you in many years' time, because you've still got a huge career ahead of you, you'll twist them to be all positives. You know, I
Hmm.
can, you look
Yeah,
back
because
and you think,
there's a learning, right? There's a learning,
yes, yes, and you do learn,
of course.
and so you can make it a positive. Not always immediately, but give it a couple of years and you'll find a positive.
Yeah, it is true. Sometimes it takes time, uh, and
Yes.
this seems to be like a perfect segue to my usual and final question. Every interview finishes in the same way, and nobody can answer that better than you, I think. So I'm quite curious to hear what you have to say. But you know, now that you've been through a lot of different experience, you had a successful career, and you meant so much for a lot of us in the community. Is what would be your hint, your recommendation for someone younger just starting in their scientific career?
I think I would give the advice I think that was given to me when I was starting out. When I was told, I wasn't told, but when I met my head of department one day on the stairs, and he said to me, Lesley, I think you're trying to do too much. You're At the time I was doing a job for the university. I was trying to run a research group, and I had two young children at home. And he said, in his opinion, you could do two things really well, but I had to choose what I was going to do. And he said to me, and I'll bet you'll keep with the children, which was good that he said that, because that was showed perception. And so I said, yes, I would keep with the children. I thought I could do everything, I could do it all, but I went and thought about it, and they were correct. And I came back and did research and made my name in research, which then helped me do everything else I did. And I think it was a good advice. I think you can do two things very well, but I think if you try to do too many things at the one time, it slips, and so you end up shortchanging yourself, but also shortchanging what it is you're trying to do. So it's something that I've kept in mind ever since, that is to not try and do everything at the one time. You can do everything, but not all at the same time. You can do it sequentially, and to choose what it is you're doing. So that would be my advice. Don't try and do it all at the same time. It won't work.
uh, this was what I was expecting, uh, something different. And it makes so much sense. Lesley, thank you so much. I have enjoyed this immensely. I
Me
feel
too.
privileged.
Me too.
Good. I'm glad to hear. Thank you so much for being with us. I wish you all the best for the lot of things you still have to give. And again, I thank you for all you've done for the chemical community. So, and great having you with us.
Thank you so much, and to you, keep doing what you're doing, because you have got some wonderful stories out there for us all to listen to, and that's what gives me pleasure anyways, listening to them. So thank you.
Thanks, Lesley.